and averaged about 68% above last year levels. And in this context, Europe played a key balancing role. What we have seen in the first 5 months of the year is that despite shrinking global gas demand, global LNG production was actually up by almost 8%. And in this context, Europe absorbed about 2/3 of additional LNG supply. The combination of the sharp decline in domestic consumption with this huge LNG influx, which was 20% above last year levels, naturally weighed on the import flows from traditional pipeline suppliers. We have seen that exports from North Africa and Russia plummeted by 25% year-on-year, and Norwegian deliveries have fallen by 5% year-on-year. The story started to change in June, when we have seen, first of all, European spot prices to fall to historical lows, and also we saw that the transatlantic price spread between TTF and Henry Hub have fallen to below zero. And as such, LNG flows have been increasingly redirected to the Asian markets. And we saw that LNG imports into Europe have fallen by 10% year-on-year between June and September. At the same time, we have also started to see some demand recovery going on in Europe. In fact, European gas consumption grew by about 3% in the third quarter. This has been primarily driven by the recovering gas to power demand. And just a couple of highlights, for instance, in Turkey, we have seen gas-fired power generation increasing by 34% year-on-year. In Germany, 10% year-on-year. So this created some additional market space, which then has been mostly captured by recovering pipeline supplies. We have seen exports from North Africa to increase by 6%, and Norwegian deliveries rose by an impressive 16% year-on-year, albeit from a relatively low level. And when it comes to Russian flows, they have been still down year-on-year by about 18%. But this is partly due to the increased usage of what we call virtual reverse flows or backhaul via Ukraine, which in turn contributed to higher net storage injections into the Ukrainian storage sites. And we see that this will probably contribute to higher exit flows from Ukraine to the European Union through the fourth quarter, something we already started to see happening in October. But of course, we also need to acknowledge that LNG played an important role in terms of supply adjustment, especially in the third quarter. In fact, we have seen that LNG supplies have fallen by 7 BCM per month, or 17% between January and July of this year. And while the supply adjustment in the United States have been the most discussed one, we should also highlight that 2/3 of the LNG supply adjustment occurred outside the United States. And what is, I think, important to highlight here is that without all these flexibility mechanisms, the adjustment to the 2020 demand shock would have been less orderly and could have had resulted in damaging effects for the contractual and commercial structures underpinning global gas trade. Now, when looking ahead, we foresee that global gas demand is going to grow by 3%, and will recover to pre-crisis levels in 2021. This will be mainly driven by the fast-growing markets of Asia and the Middle East as economic activity and electricity consumption ramps back. Through the medium term, we foresee global gas demand to grow at a rate of 1.5% per year, still making natural gas the fastest growing fossil fuel. But at the same time, this growth rate is well below the 2.5% growth rate we have seen between 2014 and 2019. Now, during the same period, between 2020 and 2025, we also see that about 120 BCM of LNG export capacity is going to be added. And these liquefaction capacity additions are likely to outpace the growth in LNG demand, and as such increases the prospect of a structurally loose gas market in the medium term. And when we look at the contracts underpinning global gas trade, I think that there is mainly three key points to look at. One is that we see that about 1/3 of the active LNG contract, equating to 200 BCM of contracts, are set to expire in the next 5 years. This is obviously a risk, but also an opportunity for market players involved in LNG trading. But we also see that the contractual structures are changing. Based on the contract outlook we are having, destination flexible volumes will account for over 50% of the contractual volumes by 2024. And when it comes to pricing, the changes are more slow, but at the same time, we see also that there is a gradual trend towards hub indexed pricing in LNG contracts. The share of oil indexation is set to fall from above 70% in 2018 to just above 50% in 2025. And this is important because it shows that LNG flows are going to be increasingly dictated by the price signals set on a competitive basis by the supply-demand market fundamentals. And on this slide, we see the evolving contractual position of portfolio players. So the ratio between the purchase and sales contract have been decreasing from a height of 85% in 2016 to 63% last year. And based on the current contractual outlook, we see that it will decline to 55% in 2025. What does it mean? It means that the portfolio players are going to become increasingly exposed to the spot market. And this is, of course, contributing to the evolution of a greater liquidity on the global LNG market. And this might well induce the reinvention of the business model of LNG as we knew it before. On this point, I would like to conclude. I think the key takeaways is again, we expect natural gas demand to drop by 120 BCM this year, the largest drop on record, and we foresee that gas demand is going to recover in 2021. I think that this is, of course, a major uncertainty when we see how quickly the daily situation is changing related to the coronavirus crisis. But when we look at the expiry of contracts, this 200 BCM of contracts being expired is adding an additional layer of uncertainty on how the market is going to evolve. But we see that it is an opportunity both for buyers and sellers to reinvent the LNG business model, to add further liquidity and flexibility to the existing mechanisms. And as highlighted in the beginning, we are moving to a quarterly update on the gas market because we see that there is quite substantial demand to analyze short-term market developments as the market is moving quite fast these days. Thank you.
Many thanks to you, Greg. Very interesting insights from the IEA report. Maybe I will just ask you the three, let's say, clarifications or follow-up questions that have arrived meanwhile through the chat, if it's okay with you. The first is about one of the charts you showed, where there is actually a quite quick recovery of gas supply from Norway compared to Russian LNG. So if you could explain that in a bit more details. And also participants ask what your view is in terms of evolution of prices across regional LNG hubs, if they are going to converge or not. And how much of the flex priced and non-oil indexed LNG trade is tied to new capacity that will be financed with the commercial structure? These three quick questions, if you could just provide quick answers, please. Thanks. But you're muted.
Thank you, Ilaria. So on the first question, indeed, the Norwegian recovery has been impressive. It rose by 16% during the third quarter, and it has been especially very significant in September, when I think it was above 40% year on year. Now, the reason for that is twofold. One, it highlights the competitiveness of Norwegian flows into the Northwest European market. It has been very much supported by deliveries into Germany and the Netherlands, and here we can also relate this to the decreasing Dutch gas production from Groningen. But I think that the main reason is also that this increase is happening from a relatively low base, because last year in September, Norwegian deliveries have fallen to, I believe, a 20-year low, mainly due to the very high maintenance on the Norwegian gas infrastructure assets. I think that when it comes to prices, so let me start with the fact that global gas benchmark have recovered very strongly since their lows and at end of May. So, for instance, in Europe, we have seen TTF growing by fivefold. JKM is trading around $7 per MMBTU, and Henry Hub is at $3 per MMBTU. So basically, all these benchmarks are now above the price levels of last year. I think that we have seen also a recovery in the price spreads between Henry Hub versus TTF, Henry Hub versus JKM, which allows that U.S. exports, LNG exports, have ramped back now. They fully recovered and have been actually about 30% higher in October versus last year. And we see also that the spread between TTF and JKM has widened. It has been almost $2 per MMBTU. And this reinforces the trend that LNG is increasingly diverted from Europe into Asia. We have seen in October that European LNG imports decreased by over 20%, because there is a very strong demand nowadays in Asia. It is partly due to the recovering demand, but also partly due to the seasonality of LNG imports in Asia, which is linked to the structural lack of seasonal gas storage. In terms of forecast on prices, we don't comment on that at the agency. So I would like to withdraw from that. But I think that maybe one observation we can make at that point is that historically there have been a relatively strong correlation between oil and the Asian spot prices. Now we see that has been disappearing in the last couple of years, and at the same time, the correlation between the regional gas benchmarks is increasing, and I think it makes sense to expect that this trend is going to continue, partly fueled by all the additional liquidity we see emerging in the global energy market. And Ilaria, the third question has been, I think, related to the contracts. Would it be possible to remind?
Yes. How much of the flex priced and non-oil indexed LNG trade is tied to new capacity that will be financed with that commercial structure?
Okay, so I think it is about half, but I would need to double check on that, and more than happy to provide the exact numbers to the person who asked it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. And you see that you triggered already quite some interest on this recent evolution. But now it's time to turn to electricity, to Silvia Bayer, our next speaker. As I mentioned in the introduction, we decided to focus this online debate on two very recent publications from the IEA, the gas security report, but also the IEA power system in transition that was published only a couple of weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. But there's also an important, another important report that Silvia will briefly guide us through. And although it's from a few months ago, it's still very interesting to know about its findings. Silvia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ilaria, Jean-Michel. It's always a pleasure to see you, particularly these few opportunities that we now have to meet, but they're ever more so online. It's great. Excellent topic for our discussion today, energy system security. We wonder at the IEA also increasingly around this discussion, you know, that we traditionally come from the oil security, moved to gas security, and we've just released a major report on electricity security, as you said, the power systems and transition report that my colleagues did in the IEA. So without further delaying our presentation, I just wanted to note that I was really always looking at the Florence School of Regulation in terms of, you know, new regulatory approaches. And when we discussed energy sector coupling at the time, maybe a year ago, we had also invited Andres Piebalgs to brief us on this in the framework of one of our big reports, the EU Energy Policy Review. So with Andres Piebalgs, indeed, you know, we were also wondering how should regulation adapt to this? Is there room for policymakers to improve the whole energy system from a regulatory perspective? So I'm sure you have very interesting discussions these days at Florence School on Regulation when it comes to, you know, between gas and electricity experts. So in this short presentation this afternoon, and I'm very pleased to see a lot of friends on the webinar today. I'm pleased to complement what Gergely just presented on the global gas market trends, how we define electricity flexibility, but gas flexibility more so today. If I can have the first slide, I just want to briefly discuss what we have presented already in June, as you said, at the end of June. In fact, the IEA has given its opinions and its recommendations on the future European market design, and our energy policy review. And the Florence School was involved. Thanks very much for your participation. This report was presented on the 25th of June by the Executive Director together with EU Energy Commissioner Kadri Simpson. It's a peer review, so it was led by Australia, and we had a lot of international experts to look at the EU policies around the Green Deal, experts from Canada, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, Switzerland, the United States. You see on the slide some of the very high-level key recommendations. Clearly, there is the biggest element was the importance of the energy sector in the recovery, in the green recovery of the European economy. And with that, we had a number of recommendations on that front. But also we looked at the interplay of the policies around energy efficiency, renewables, and digitalization when it comes to this increasingly linked sectors, transport, industry, and buildings. And we provided recommendations on keeping all technology options open, so providing really a level playing field for the investments and to boost access and availability of sustainable finance. And the biggest part of the report is actually on electricity and gas security. And you may say that we had probably at the end of June, we had just seen the start of COVID, the impacts on the energy market, including particularly in the European Union. But then also the policy pipeline was extremely busy, and a lot of new policies being presented from the European Commission, as you outlined, Ilaria, with the energy systems, energy sector integration strategy, the hydrogen strategy. So I'd like to share some thoughts from the IEA on these strategies and how we are rethinking some of the security policies. So if I can have the next slide, that would be great. So the European electricity demand has actually also had its small Black April, but nothing compared to global oil markets. So if you see here, our lockdown in Europe, we all remember that, and we're obviously in the next one in many countries. It has actually really reduced electricity demand, but here we are getting down to 12, 15%, but it's not anything compared on the whole for the year, for the first half. You know, we can say overall it's 7% compared to 2019 demand. But that is really nothing compared to what the gas sector, what the oil sector has seen. This particular clearly is the phenomenon of the commercial and industrial sectors shutting down their activity. At the same time, we all are aware our strong household consumption has kept steady as the digitalization with teleworking became the norm. And in this very, let's say, interesting laboratory, we could see that already a lot of the typical energy transition discussions that we are having all across the board these days, you know, what are the different contributions from the different fuels in a situation where you have a major oversupply because your demand has collapsed. So in fact, this had an impact on investments, and the IEA published a number of reports outlining the investment impacts. Again, it was the impact on electricity sector investment was not as strong as for oil and gas. So here, particularly renewable investment proved to be very resilient. And overall, renewable dispatch was very resilient throughout the lockdowns, of course, depending on the availability of the resource. But electricity has really become indispensable for the 24 over 7 days, you know. And today we are a digital economy. So it's quite clear that we need to focus in the future on electricity security much more than we did maybe 10 years ago. And in the EU, of course, the framework has evolved. I'm going to talk about that soon. So as the COVID crisis has reminded us really about the importance of electricity, we see there are many interlinkages happening, and some of the gas supply disruptions that happened previously in 2018 and 19 in the EU, particularly thinking about the beast from the east, which was sometime in the UK, in that gas region in Northwest, which was very impressive. And you could see already at play these interlinkages between gas and electricity. So now with the COVID crisis, we see this much stronger happening. But of course, remind ourselves that, if I can have the next slide, in fact, the overall share of electricity in our final consumption in the EU is literally at 23%. That was 2019 data. So we are not in a situation where we are strongly electrified, but we of course will get there. So there is much more opportunity if we look at all the sectors and their fuel composition today. With the strong climate targets that we have in Europe, there are many more opportunities to increase the share of low carbon fuels, in particular in transport. So logically, we all will see a stronger electrification of these end-use sectors. But we also know from a lot of the IEA scenarios that not everything can be electrified. Clearly, some parts of the final consumption, maybe let's say around 40% roughly, would be still required to be supplied by low carbon fuels such as hydrogen or biofuels. So in a way, looking at the electrification rates, we will see an increase, but it will be definitely an increase that is not progressing as fast as we may predict if we look at our historic track. So the share of renewables, and particularly wind and solar, is going to increase steadily within that electricity that we will use. And particular on the next slide, you can see the immense growth when we look at the sustainable future on the right side. There is a massive increase of our electricity demand being met by variable renewables, wind and solar. Wind in particular in Europe is going to be the leader in the mix. So out to 2040, you see that you will have much more flexibility, of course, on the system. But what is interesting, you will also have much more dispatchable sources, because a few of those, like coal, we see in light green here, they are going to leave the system, and they need to be replaced by some way or other fuel. And in our mix in 2040, we see there is a much robust role for nuclear and a robust role for gas, and also for hydro. So just, some of the possible future scenarios that we envisage if we think about the European electricity production in 2040. And in our next slide, we clearly warn that things are maybe not going as smoothly as we expect, because in the next 10 years, we expect a rather bumpy road. Particularly looking at what capacity will retire, you see that on the left side, coal, we quite clearly have 16 member countries that are exiting coal in the next 5 and then 10 years. And then we have also a lot of renewables that will need to be replaced. So you have large capacity additions on wind and solar, but also retirements and replacements as new technology comes in. So nuclear plays an important role. You see in the middle here, where you will literally see large retirements because of the aging fleet. Europe now, the average age is around 40 years. So we're really in a crucial period where it's to governments to think about long-term operation, extension of the lifetime, and also new nuclear projects are can be seen across the EU. So this all means that our power generation capacity as such is going to change very rapidly, and the amount of flexibility needed will increase very considerably. And at that time of this crucial transition that we see in electricity, we are adding another challenge, which is the digitalization. So you see on the next slide, there is in fact globally an increasing incident of cyber attacks. We know that, and most of them are linked to connected devices. So the more we are becoming interconnected, the more we have automation, the more we have a rapid growth of these connected devices, the more is also the risk to cybersecurity. And they are clearly interrelated. This is global data here on the slide. We're not always aware every day on the major cyber attacks, but they are all across the energy system, of course. They are not only an experience in electricity, but electricity is sort of the juice, the actual edge where the grid connects so many of the energy infrastructure. And that is true for gas, hydro dams, or grids themselves. So policymakers and regulators, but also the industry, must really play all a key role to ensure the cyber resilience of the entire electricity value chain. And in our report on the power systems and transition, you have much more analysis on digitalization, and as well on the importance of climate resilience. So that is something we have put together on our next slide. You can see the different impacts that we see because climate change is such a strong impact. Extreme weather events are on the rise across the globe, and Europe is no exception here. Again, climate change impacts the entire electricity value chain, including generation, transmission, distribution, but also electricity demand. And the impact of these, sea level rise, extreme weather events, is very significant on our electricity security. In Europe, of course, the Clean Energy Package and the governance framework have provided for a number of new rules on electricity security, taking a very strong angle also on digitalization and cybersecurity, but not yet so strongly on climate change impacts and resilience. However, countries in Europe have actually prepared themselves and have included these aspects into their national adaptation strategies. We've seen that in Austria, Czech Republic, in Estonia, Greece, Italy. So if we take all these impacts together, we're really in a rather tight spot and have to pay attention to many risks and many interrelated risks that are all on the rise. So what that means for a policy that looks at a greater integration of the energy sectors, I will show you on our last slide, which means the more sectors are becoming interlinked, you will see more carriers being available in other sectors. And we've actually included heat here, which we should not forget, was one of the first flexibility sources in many systems. And we maybe have seen heat and power, district heating, as one of the initial sources of flexibility. But heat needs to be as flexible as electricity, and the gas sector needs to become as well flexible. So it's a bit like raising the tempo on the cooker, where everybody has to play in a much faster system, in a much more flexible system. And if you look at our sectors, we've sort of reviewed different countries and case studies for each of the sectors, looking at what countries are doing already today that are, looking at sort of an integrated view between buildings and power, transport and buildings, or, all these links. And our conclusion is that, in fact, policymakers are already thinking of coordinating some of the policies. clearly on the European side, clean energy package, we have more coordination between energy efficiency and renewables. But we also need to think much more about policies that are addressed to each sector, which are still very much in a sector silo. And as the electricity generators become, electricity system operators become more and more independent, they actually have to be really an independent sort of dispatcher of many sources of flexibility. So that means policies in Europe and European policymakers should really think about the digitalization framework and the policies that are needed, have safety standards and address system risks. This is definitely something that will be high on the agenda and should be part of an energy system, energy sector integration strategy. And of course, hydrogen, we all know this is part of what you see on the slide, the gas will play a very important role in this. Clearly, technologies will drive this sector integration strongly in the coming years. So with that, I'm happy to discuss with all of you, and thank you very much.
Many thanks to you, Silvia. Very, very interesting presentation. I like also the conclusion. It's true that we have to go towards a more energy integrated system and regulation. And it's also true what you said, that there are still some sort of resistances due to the previous silos thinking, but we will have to address them and overcome, I think. There was just a clarification. There were a couple of clarification questions, if you don't mind. Then I will give the floor to Jean-Michel for some comments and a question to our panelists. But before that, could you clarify, when you say gas, when you refer to gas in the 2040 electricity mix, do you refer to natural gas, or do you refer also to the, let's say, renewable decarbonized gas? And also, sorry, attached to that, if you could clarify whether these scenarios have been developed prior to the COVID crisis.
Yes. Yes to both.
Okay.
What you saw was the 2018 data for 2019 World Energy Outlook, but it has actually not changed in this year's Outlook. So in fact, there are very few changes on the Outlook side when it comes to the role of gas in the medium term. And clearly, we've also in our EU review looked at the potential for gas in renewable gases or biomethane, and there is indeed a large potential. So what you see here in the slide in terms of the power generation, that would be really natural gas, because biomethane we see pretty much being part of a system, but not to a large share. So some feed in, of course, is expected, and it will be substantial BCMs. I think overall it will not be a large share of the market, so it will be a natural gas in that sense, what you see in 2040 here. Again, the scenario world we are in has certain assumptions. Truly enough, you could say that the COVID may stronger impact this if it continues over the next year. Again, we see more lockdowns. This is difficult to predict how this outlook will look next year, in fact. But the good thing is updating our outlooks every year.
With huge efforts, and thank you very much for that. I always find them very, very helpful. Jean-Michel, a couple of comments and a question, if you wish. You are muted. Voila.
I was muted. I am not anymore. Always a pleasure to meet Silvia, that I know, respect, and for whom I have much sympathy since many years, and to discover Gergely, that I know since a few minutes, but it will grow, I'm sure. I'm happy also to see that Sylvia has become a trusted expert. We can rely on analysis and follow it. I'm seeing also that I'm becoming older, because some years ago, security was mainly stability of the flows. Do we operate the system well? Do we have enough capacity? And of course, we were looking at it inside the EU, across the countries, and we had a different view outside the EU. For example, the Minister of Gergely, Peter Kaderiak, was a dear friend at France School, and he made a fantastic review of security of supply for gas. And can we trust our Russian friends on the delivery? But this was some years ago, and it seems that these days, more and more, we are discussing privacy, integrity of data, respect of privacy, protection against cyber threats. And my main question will be, all of this is linked to digitalization in a sense. So is digitalization an opportunity to do better things or to do new things? Or is it mainly a challenge or a threat? How do you see it? And how would you address this question mark?
Okay, I would start from Sylvia, who had a reference in one of her slides to digitalization and an increasing security threat.
Right. So at the IEA, we have actually published a major report on digitalization in the energy sector. That must have been 2 or 3 years ago. I would say 2018. But in any case, this report has sort of kickstarted our work, and we're going to do a lot more work on that front in the next 3 years. Jean-Michel, digitalization, yes, definitely is an opportunity.
To do what?
Sorry.
An opportunity to do what?
To do what? So to increasingly link all of the flexibility sources, to have instant automatized delivery. So I think this is really, when you talk about flexibility, digitalization seems to be an opportunity. Electricity, of course, once it gets across the entire system, we're really seeing an issue of governance, because the digitalization or digitalized world is much more complex than our usual world used to be on oil or gas or electricity. So if we, in our report that came out last week at the Global Ministerial on System Integration, in fact, so the system integration folks have really looked at this report closely on the power system and transitions. And one dedicated chapter on digitalization concludes basically that with the digitalization, however, we have increased cyber risks. That's quite clear. And that, you have to really increase the resilience. You can't expect that you can fully be protected 100%. You have to make sure that all systems are secure, and you have to, depending on the country, choose your different policies. In fact, some more federally structured countries will probably set governance structures that are also more flexible, so that they can adapt more performance-based standards, while other areas, like smaller island or national states without a federal structure, they will maybe choose more prescriptive rules. But everybody has to sort of, take their assessment. I must say one guiding thought on this is really the increase in communication, increase in consultation, increase in having all the right people at the same time at hand. It reminds us a bit when we talk about security, the security room where you want to have all the people at the telephone and at the mobiles and line, but you really want to exchange more information. And so when it comes to what type of data we want to exchange, it's the data that needs to be defined. And there needs to be a lot more exchange, because truly everything is classified in the digitalization, cybersecurity world. You wouldn't share data, but you need to, because the industry needs to know, the policymakers need to know. So that in a nutshell is basically the challenge.
Thank
you are where you have a view, and this view is articulating different parts of the issue. But if we go to gas, is gas an old industry having kept the old tradition or old concern for security, or do we see new things regarding gas security?
Oh, I think that there's a new aspect emerging. So when we look at the Northwest European market and also the European market, we see that there is a profound transformation in the power system. Just in the last 5 years in Northwest Europe, the share of variable renewables doubled. They account today for about 1/5 of the power supply mix. At the same time, the share of coal halved during that same period of time. And when we are looking, on the next 10 years, we clearly see that this trend is going to accelerate. Out of the 27 EU member states, 16 have new coal phase-out plans, and by 2030, with the exception of Germany, there is not going to be any coal capacity left in Northwest Europe. And this is a very much welcome development from the perspective of greenhouse gas emissions. But at the same time, it tells us that the role of gas-fired power capacity is going to be increasingly important to serve as a backup to the electricity system. So in this sense, there is an intimate link emerging between electricity supply security and gas deliverability. And when it comes to gas deliverability, there is also a couple of trends to take into account. First of all, that in Northwest Europe, domestic gas production is going to decrease by threefold in the next 10 years. Mainly due to the closure of Groningen, but also to depleting fields in the North Sea. And there is also an aspect about which we don't talk too much, is the closure of storages, of storage sites, and also air gas storages, which, once air gas is going to be phased out in France, in Germany, the raison d'être of air gas storages is going to disappear in those markets. So there will be also a decrease in gas deliverability from storage sites. Now, this highlights that we still need to keep an eye on gas deliverability and enhance it in the coming years.
In the context of sector integration, because now what we called before energy security is now also the way electricity and gas are linked, and maybe in the close future, in 10 years, the way hydrogen will be linked with electricity. But this is a favorite topic of Ilaria. So Ilaria, I'm giving the floor back to you.
Many thanks. Well, it was really an easy job today to moderate this super interesting discussion. I think we can say that we learned something new. Definitely I did. And I learned that security is now different meanings, both on the electricity and on the gas side. And it seems that gas security now is more threatened internally, if I understood correctly Greg's conclusions, because security of gas supply is more at risk in those countries in those areas, you mentioned Northwest Europe, where the energy transition is happening more fast, I mean, in a more speedy way. And on the electricity side, we learned that, again, electricity security is not anymore only reliability of a continuous flow, continuity of flows, but also it now embraces threats coming from digitalization, from potential cyber attacks. So I think all of this is extremely interesting and useful, and it was a good idea to wear this energy system integration lenses for our debate, because I think we managed to think about the future in a really sector coupled or energy system integrated way. So thank you very much for your fantastic contributions, Silvia Beyer and Gergely Molnar. And thank you very much also to